I had been driving for hours, my eyes dry and heavy from staring at the dark road ahead. The trees lined both sides, bending slightly with the wind. I wasn't sure where I was anymore. I hadn't seen another car for miles. My GPS had stopped working a while back, leaving me to guess where I was going. The gas gauge was almost on empty, and I needed to find a station soon. That's when I saw it. The gas station appeared out of nowhere, the neon sign flickering faintly in the distance. It wasn't a modern place. It looked old, like it had been forgotten by time. The sign above the pump said gas and go, but the lights were dim, casting an eerie glow over the area. I pulled in, grateful to have found somewhere to fill up. There was only one pump that looked it worked, and even that seemed questionable. I stepped out of the car, the night air colder than I expected. There was no one around, not even a car parked near the convenience store attached to the station. The windows were dark, but a faint light glowed inside. The pump creaked as I lifted the nozzle, and the smell of gasoline hit my nose. As I began filling up, I glanced toward the store. Something about it felt wrong, like it was staring back at me. The wind picked up, rustling the trees behind the station, and I could hear the faintest sound, like a whisper. I told myself it was just the wind. The pump clicked, signaling that the tank was full, but when I went to put the nozzle back, the pump handle slipped from my hand, hitting the ground with a loud clang. The noise seemed to echo too long, like it was bouncing off invisible walls. I bent down to pick it up when I saw something move in the reflection of my car window. Just a quick flash of movement behind me, near the store. I spun around, heart pounding in my chest. There was nothing. The store sat as still and empty as before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. It had been a long drive, after all. After putting the nozzle back in place, I figured I should at least go inside the store and see if anyone was working. I walked slowly toward the entrance, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. The glass door was covered in dust, like it hadn't been cleaned in years. I pushed it open, and the little bell above the door jingled softly, the sound sharp in the otherwise quiet night. Inside, the store was worse than it looked from the outside. The shelves were half empty, some covered in a thin layer of dust. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows that danced across the walls. There was a counter at the back, but no one stood behind it. The cash register was old, with yellowed buttons, and next to it, a pack of cigarettes lay open, as if someone had just left them there. I called out, but my voice felt swallowed by the silence. No answer. I waited a few seconds, hoping someone would come out from the back room. Nothing. I moved toward the counter, feeling the weight of the silence press against me. There was a door behind the counter, slightly ajar. From where I stood, I could see just enough to notice that the darkness behind the door seemed deeper than the rest of the store. Something about it felt unnatural, like it didn't belong. I stepped closer, staring at that dark doorway. That's when I saw it. A figure, just for a split second, standing in the doorway. It was too dark to make out any details, but I saw enough to know it wasn't right. Its outline was strange, too tall and too thin, and its face, there was something wrong with its face. I blinked and the figure was gone, leaving only the blackness behind the door. I backed away, my breath coming quicker. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had seen. I turned to leave, and that's when I heard the sound. It was soft at first, like something dragging along the floor. It came from behind me, from that dark doorway. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. I shoved the door open and ran back to my car, not looking back. I could still hear that dragging sound behind me, growing louder with each step. I jumped into the car, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys. When the engine roared to life, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, speeding out of the station. In the rearview mirror, I could see the gas station shrinking in the distance, but just before it disappeared, I saw it again, standing in the doorway, watching me leave. That figure, its face still hidden in shadow. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town. The lights of the gas station burned in my memory. That strange, too thin figure standing there like it was waiting for something or someone. I've never been able to shake that night from my mind. It was a cold, rainy night, the kind of night where you'd rather be anywhere else but stuck working the late shift at a small rundown gas station on the edge of town. My name's Dan, and I've been working here for just over a year. Nights like these are usually quiet, with only the rain tapping against the windows to keep me company. The station itself was old, faded yellow tiles covered the floor, and the flickering neon sign outside gave everything a strange, sickly glow. The smell of oil and stale coffee filled the air, as it always did. I hated it. The rain had been coming down for hours, heavy and constant. It made the whole place feel even more isolated, like the world outside was a million miles away. I'd already counted the cash in the register twice, restocked the shelves, and mopped the floor. There wasn't much else to do. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above me, and I remember leaning against the counter, staring out into the dark, thinking about how dead it was tonight. At around 2 a.m., a car pulled up. The headlights cut through the rain like two bright, glaring eyes. It parked right by the front door, unusual for someone just stopping for gas. I didn't recognize the car. The engine rumbled for a second longer than it should have before cutting off, and that gave me an uneasy feeling. I straightened up, waiting for whoever it was to come in. The door creaked open, and a man stepped inside. He was tall, soaking wet, and wore a dark hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. I couldn't see much of him, but his posture seemed tense and rigid. His jeans were ripped and dirty like he had been out in the rain for hours. "Evening," I muttered, though he didn't respond. Instead, he walked slowly toward the back of the store, near the drinks and snacks. Something about him didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just that he was dripping wet, or that he hadn't said a word. It was his walk, stiff, deliberate, almost like he was forcing himself to move. I tried not to think too much about it. We got all kinds here, drifters, locals, people just passing through. Still, my eyes kept darting back to him as he wandered between the aisles. He was taking too long to decide, longer than anyone should for a bottle of soda or a pack of chips. I heard the faint rustle of plastic, but he hadn't picked anything up. I told myself not to worry, but the longer he stayed, the more the pit in my stomach grew. Something wasn't right. The rain outside pounded harder, the wind whistling through the cracks in the old windows. I wiped the counter with a rag, pretending to stay busy, but my eyes were glued to the back of the store. Then, just when I thought he might leave, he turned sharply and started walking toward me. My heart picked up pace, a dull thudding in my chest. His hands were shoved deep in his hoodie's pockets, and his face was still hidden in shadow. I swallowed hard, trying to keep calm. When he reached the counter, he didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, rainwater pooling on the floor beneath him. I forced myself to look him in the eye, or at least where I thought his eyes would be. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice a little shaky despite my effort to sound casual. He didn't answer. Instead, his hand emerged from his pocket, and what he placed on the counter made my blood turn cold. A gun. It wasn't a big gun, just a small black revolver, but it might as well have been the size of a cannon for how it made me feel. My throat went dry, and I took an instinctive step back. The man finally spoke, his voice low, almost a growl. "Give me the cash," he said, and those 4 words sent a chill down my spine. There was no emotion in his voice, no hesitation. He was calm, too calm for someone holding a gun in a gas station at 2 a.m. I nodded, hands trembling as I opened the register. The clinking of coins and the rustle of bills seemed so loud in the silence that followed. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I just kept my eyes on the money as I pulled out the cash, praying he wouldn't pull the trigger. The seconds stretched out like hours. The storm outside raged on, and all I could hear was the pounding of rain and the pounding of my own heart. I handed him the money. Crumpled bills, all we had in the register at this time of night. He took it without a word and stuffed it into his pocket. I thought he would leave then, just take the cash and walk out. But he didn't move. He stood there, staring at me, the gun still pointed in my direction. For a moment, I thought that was it, that he'd shoot me just to tie up loose ends. My mind raced, thinking about all the stupid things I'd never get to do. But then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he turned and walked toward the door. He didn't run. He didn't even hurry. He just walked like nothing had happened. The door swung open with a creak, and the cold air rushed in. He stepped out into the rain, the gun still in his hand. I stood frozen behind the counter, unable to move until I heard the car door slam and the engine sputter to life. The taillights disappeared into the night, swallowed by the storm. I didn't call the police right away. I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at the puddle of water he had left on the floor, trying to process what had just happened. It didn't feel real. None of it did. But the empty cash register and the faint smell of gunpowder told me otherwise. The rain kept falling, but now it sounded different. Working at a gas station for the last 2 years, I've seen all kinds of people come through. Some were just passing by, filling up their tanks before they disappeared down the highway. Others, regulars, who stopped in often enough that I got to know their stories. But most were strangers, gone as quickly as they came. My shift usually ran from 4 p.m. to midnight, and while it could be boring, it wasn't exactly scary. That changed one Saturday night. The station was mostly empty. It was just after 10 p.m., and I was finishing up some cleaning inside the convenience store. The night was cool, with a light fog beginning to settle over the empty road. Then I heard the distinct sound of a car pulling up to one of the pumps. I looked out through the glass window and saw an old, beat-up sedan rolling in. The car looked like it hadn't been taken care of in years. Rust patches covered most of the body, and the headlights flickered like they could go out at any second. The driver was a man, probably in his late 40s or early 50s, with a rough beard and dirty clothes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were sunken and dark, and his skin had an oily sheen under the dim lights of the station. There was something about him that immediately made my stomach twist. It wasn't that he looked angry or dangerous, exactly. Just off. He parked his car at pump 3 and sat there for a moment. I watched him through the window, waiting for him to get out and start pumping gas, but he didn't move. He just stared forward, hands on the steering wheel, his eyes wide and unfocused. I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me wanted to stay inside the store and wait until he left, but something in my gut told me to go out and see if he needed help. Maybe his car had broken down, maybe he was lost, or maybe I was just overthinking things as usual. I stepped out of the store, the cool night air hitting my face, and walked over to his car. His eyes snapped toward me as I approached, and for a second I thought I saw something almost like fear flash across his face. I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Need any help?" I asked, keeping my distance. He shook his head, not saying a word, and looked away quickly. I didn't like it. His behavior was strange, but I didn't want to push. I turned to head back inside, but as I did, something caught my eye. In the back seat of his car, partially hidden under a dirty black cloth, was a hand. A small hand. At first, I thought it was a mannequin or some sort of prop, but something about it looked too real. It was pale, with tiny fingers curled loosely like a child's hand. My heart skipped a beat. I took a deep breath and turned back to the man. "Is that your kid in the back?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though I could feel the fear creeping into my voice. The man's face changed instantly. His eyes hardened, and he glared at me with such intensity that I felt frozen to the spot. "Mind your business," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I wanted to walk away, pretend I hadn't seen anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Should I confront him? Call the police? What if I was overreacting? I nodded slowly and stepped back, pretending to head back inside. "All right," I muttered, though I'm not sure he even heard me. But instead of going back to the store, I circled behind his car, keeping out of his line of sight. I needed to stall him and keep him there long enough for help to arrive. I couldn't just let him drive off with that child, if it even was a child. I walked back toward the front of the store, calling out over my shoulder, "Hey, I think something's wrong with the pump." It might take a few minutes to get it working. He didn't respond. He just kept staring forward, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing holding him together. Once I was inside, I grabbed the phone and dialed the local police. My hands were shaking as I explained the situation to the dispatcher, trying to sound calm, but feeling the panic building in my chest. Within minutes, 2 police cars pulled into the station, their lights flashing, but their sirens off. As soon as the man saw them, he bolted from his car and sprinted toward the woods behind the station. One of the officers chased after him, while the other went to check the car. I watched through the window as they pulled the cloth off the back seat. My stomach turned when I saw the boy. He was unconscious, pale but alive. The officer quickly called for an ambulance. Meanwhile, the man hadn't gotten far. The officer tackled him to the ground at the edge of the woods and cuffed him. They dragged him back to the station, his face twisted in anger, but he said nothing. The next few days were a blur of police reports and interviews. The officers told me that the boy had been kidnapped from a mall a few days earlier. His family had been frantically searching for him, and I couldn't shake the thought of what might have happened if I hadn't noticed that hand in the back seat. A few days later, the police thanked me, saying I'd probably saved the boy's life. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the image of the man's face, the coldness in his eyes, when he'd told me to mind my business. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks.